Hey, Upper's Cat, Part 2, Robert A. Heinlein's 1964, Farnham's Freehold, science fiction's most controversial novel. So we're now on page 172 and things are becoming more clearer to the party about where they are and when they are. There's a few little things in this. They've been picked up by The Chosen, one of the members of The Chosen, who conveniently is not a typical Chosen because he's a scholar and most of them are not scholars, and he's actually a bit of a humanist in his way, which most of the Chosen are not, so that's really happy for them as it transpires. But there's a few little lines in this which I think are interesting. Everybody knew that there were men somewhere in the stars. There's also a line later on where they actually mention that they can easily get to the moon, but what's the point? So this is a technologically advanced society. They use force fields, they have great technology. The technology is from lower caste Chosen and the more brighter of the servant class. So the history is unveiled, as it always is in these books, in time travel books, slowly, or you know what I mean? They don't just say or ask like you would. Even when he got it clear that the East-West War that had bounced him out of his own century was now dated 703 BC, before the Great Change, he had still trouble matching the world he had known with the history set forth in these scrolls. The war itself he didn't find hard to believe. He had experienced only a worm's eye view of the first hours, but the scrolls related matched the possibilities. A missile and bomb holocaust that escalated in its first minutes into a brilliant first strike and massive retaliation, and smeared cities from Pipeng, which I think they mean China, I guess, Pipeng, strange word, to Chicago, Toronto, to Smolensk. Goodbye Toronto. Firestorms had done in 10 times the damage the bombs did. Nerve gas and other poisons had then picked up where the fire left off. Plagues that were incubating when the shock survivors were picking themselves up and beginning to hope. Plagues that were going strong when the fallout was no longer deadly. We have a lot of capacity to really cause huge damage to us as a species. Hopefully we won't. Anyway, Hugh does not regret any of the American retaliation on the Soviet Union, which is pretty dumb considering his world's been eradicated by this. Both East and West were eradicated. I would regret any of the bombs. Better dead than red isn't really in my lexicon. Better alive and planning and figuring it out than to be dead. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. The scroll said that it killed off the northern world. What about the rest of it? It's 700 years after an East-West war before this chosen civilization becomes a real civilization. So much has been lost. Think back about 2,500 to 3,000 years from now, 1,000 years BC. We don't really know a lot. We guess a lot. We don't know, and we interpret what we see through our own lens as well, which is problematic. He knew that there had been a great book burning for 2 centuries during the turmoil, and even after the change. So for 1,000 years, books have been systematically sought out, changed, and eradicated. So the past has gone. The story maintained that the whites, with their evil ways, destroyed each other almost to the last man, leaving the innocent, charitable, merciful dark race, beloved by Uncle the Mighty — Uncle the Mighty is God — to inherit the earth. You could see that a war which smeared North America, Europe, all of Asia and India could kill off most whites and most of all Chinese. But what about the white minority in South Africa, South America, Australia and New Zealand? That's never explained. There's a throwaway line where it's estimated that their acts of mercy when they went back into the destroyed zones 1,000 years later, when radiation had gone, were actually slave raids and eradication raids. So the system was set up deliberately. Now, for those people who are Muslim, and I'm not, the Quran had been the only book officially exempt from the torch. Hugh harboured the suspicion that the Quran had not been spared either. He had owned a translation of the Quran and had read it several times, which in 1962 would be considered unusual. Anyway, like I say, I'm not going to do too many spoilers. because people should read this book themselves, I think. It's kind of an interesting book. So towards the end of it is where we're going to get the real important lessons for us as preppers. The practice of cannibalism by the Chosen is fascinating to me as a vegan. Whether it grew out of necessity because of climate change due to nuclear explosions and debris, I don't know. They don't go into that. They don't know themselves. It's part of their society that they eat human beings on a regular basis. The Chosen do. And Hugh, long story short, has some adventures, does extremely well in this new society initially, decides that it's not going to be safe, so he decides to escape and be a free man in the hills, which is pretty much impossible with this sort of technological society ranged against him. So he's talking to the Ponce, his charity, who's actually the Chosen in charge of, the Chosen who owns all of the white slaves, including Hugh and his family, by default. And he says, you're going to eat me, blah, 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 because he has seen evidence of cannibalism, incontroversial evidence of cannibalism. And the Ponce says, besides that, a gentleman does not eat members of his own family no matter what. They actually breed human beings, whites, though now most whites in North America have black blood and most blacks have white blood. Given what went on here, that you could pretty much say that for everybody. It's suggested in the book that the Chosen are much taller than the white people because of selective breeding of the whites, and it's also suggested that they have not completely African or Middle Eastern facial features, that are Western facial features in the Chosen. There is an underground railroad, which I think is an interesting thing for the slaves who escape. Surprised, eh? But there is always an underground, whenever there is a ruling class and a serving class. He says we would invent one if it wasn't there. We use it for our own purposes. We let slaves who were unruly escape, and then a few generations later we pick up their survivors and then we breed them with our slaves, otherwise our slaves would become weaker and weaker and less mentally strong. But we can't keep aggressive people in our slave pens because they'll cause trouble. Interesting. Anyway, as ever, they get sent back in time, which is cool. And this is, I think, one of the lessons. I refuse to assume that we're going to die. I won't ever make that assumption again. All my figuring is based on the assumption that we are going to live. We go on. No matter what happens, we go on. And I think that's a strong mental lesson for any preppers. And convincing the other members of your family is going to be difficult. His son Duke and his wife Grace certainly never get that message, and part of the book is about that. Now this is the critical lesson of Farnham's Freehold, the critical lesson for me. Talk about power. Hugh conveniently says it's not a racial thing, black or white. Any man who has power like that is going to be corrupted. Yes and no. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. You're talking 1962, you're talking at a time where black rights did not matter. In the States, people were burned alive for that. Not en masse, but it did happen. But the important lesson is about how you treat people in a survival situation. Not even me. Nobody can be trusted with it. This is Hugh talking about power. The one time, if I'd handled it as badly as Ponce, I mean the time that I caused a gun to be raised at Duke, his son, and he got Joe, the black servant, to raise the gun, I should simply have used karate and knocked him out or even killed him, but not humiliated him. Nobody. And I think that's an important lesson. In life or death situations, if you point a gun at me, I'm going to take that as that you were going to execute me at some point. And at some point, if you don't execute me, I may well take preparations to stop you from doing so in the future. Better to kill somebody than to humiliate them in a survival situation is probably arguable, but it seems to me a definite thing to do. So people really don't like the cannibalism in this, and I don't find it that bad. And it seemed to me have a good psychological and social cultural reason for it to be there. Nope, Ponce is a cannibal. Maybe not a cannibal, since he doesn't consider us human. But he does eat us. They all do. Ponce always ate girls. About one a day for his family table, I gathered. Girls about the age and plumpness of Kitten. Sweetheart, don't hold what he ate too much against Ponce. He honestly did not know it was wrong. And no doubt cows would feel the same way about us if they knew. Cows do know, and do have sensitive souls. So do pigs, but we won't get into that. Vegan rant over. So they get sent back in time, just him and his new wife, who is his daughter's friend. There's also a part in the book where they actually actively don't know there's anybody else alive on the planet, and they actively discuss incest to continue the population of the species, which I think a lot of people would be upset at. But it made sense in the story. When they go back in time, it's messed up. They're almost back to the point where the explosion happens. They realise after they've got back that the world's slightly changed. The nuclear bombs, the three they know of, hit exactly the same time, but other little things have changed. For example, Barbara, his new wife's car is an automatic. Sorry, is a manual. Is an automatic, not a manual. No, is a manual car, not an automatic. And and it is her car, and it has her groceries in it that she left outside the night that she went to the dinner party. So they dash away. He conveniently has a mine that he had ownership of. So they go to the mine. They find an abandoned grocery store because the warning's gone off, and they're able to grab tons of stuff, including a pregnant cat, because Hugh likes cats. At the mine, this is really lucky, they found a cow with a calf and lots of bales of hay. Presumably someone nearby converted the mine to use as a cow barn. There were a dozen or so bales of hay inside. The cow showed no wish to leave once she was at this treasure. Very convenient. They survived the atomic blasts. If the future can change the past, and they realise it has, or whatever, maybe the past can change the future too. Maybe the United States won't be wholly destroyed. Maybe this is a different world, or maybe it's the same one, just a tiny bit changed by us coming back, perhaps. And the book ends on an optimistic note. Yes, there have been epidemics, but they were probably natural. The nerve gas plagues, the viral pandemics unleashed by the East and the West on each other did not happen in this timeline that they're now in. And he starts a store. And the story is kind of amusing, and it's basically just an advert for the store at the end of the book. And I love this part. This is kind of cool. Ring bell, wait, advance, with hands up, stay on the path, avoid mines. We lost 3 customers last week. We can't afford to lose you. No sales tax. And the last line, high above their sign, their homemade starry flag is flying, and they are still going on. Now, I was told there's a long description of how you make a 9-year-old girl into a sex slave in the book. Didn't actually find that. Maybe I missed it. The parts of the book that seem controversial are very, very small. The racial slavery aspect, I think, is a critical issue. It's not an issue we talk about much with a catastrophic fall of society. If you have land and guns and power and sufficient people, would you enslave refugees or even neighbours or even family to make them do work for a bit of food, but no power and no community say and no democracy? Depends on how harsh it is, but I can't see how that would be avoided. So, before the dogs were more riot, 3 to 4 out of 5 as a book. It is dated. It's an okay read. Definitely if you like science fiction, you'll enjoy reading this on the subway like I did. Prepping. 2.5 out of 5 for prepping information. It is pretty dated. It has some good issues in it. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. Speak below, hey bear. Speak below as to what you felt when you read the book. But I did find it remarkably different from some of the comments. whether the book's been altered or not, I don't know. Things do get altered. This is a 1992 edition. I really didn't want to pay the price to get an original copy of it. I suspect that maybe the incest and maybe the sex training of 9-year-olds has been removed. It claims to be an unabridged copy. Au revoir. Oh, coming up on the Armchair Prepper Reads. I'm going to get back into this. I did the first chapter a while ago. I'm ready to go with the second chapter. This is a left-wing book about catastrophism, and it has lots of interesting little side swipes in it about what the left thinks about the right, and this is written by left-wingers, and it also has a lot of interesting observations on catastrophe and surviving catastrophe and the role of catastrophe in politics. So I enjoyed this. It's been a long time since I did chapter 1, but I'm going to get that back again. I'm totally stoked by this one. This again was recommended to me by a sub. This is 5 years after a nuclear holocaust, but I won't do this next. This one I found by accident. This is the city not long after. This is a pandemic one. It's centered in San Francisco, which has become an art colony, and they have various problems. Looking forward to that. And for fun for us all, Quozzle, Alan Dean Foster. I'm looking forward to this. We get invaded. Human beings. If we get invaded, will we fight? Or will we become slaves? Or will we just be killed? Au revoir.